I'm Stephanie Kidd. I'm here at Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. I've got many years in teaching mathematics, also with our special needs kids and with low incidence. So, what are our targets? I'm going to talk about your targets that you're actually looking for. I've also put that dose resource on mine so you can get to it. When you go to this, you'll actually see it's got several layers. But first of all, let's talk about our targets, and I want to talk about the ones that I'm going to function on. So if you are looking for your targets, right here they are. You can see them per grade level, of course, and we're going to look at what does it look like for multiplication beginning in third grade all the way up through into 10th grade today, and some of the things that we need to work on. So that's what we're going to discuss today. And so if you don't know where your targets are, again, right here on the Kentucky the ky.gov with the education, make sure that you are going to your alternate standards down at the bottom and you're actually looking at those targets. And those targets are set up very similar, but like Kim said, they're not always on the same level that we have for our standards. Oops, wrong place. Okay, so we're going to look at multiplications definitely today, fractions a whole lot, patterns and functions, which gets into algebra, some of that today. And I'm going to talk about proportions because that's also one of your standards today. So if you go here to the KY dose, I'm just going to get this out of the way right here. That's the one I sent you. You click here, you'll see that it says low incidence. It goes down, talks about some different things. But if you go right here at the top, is everybody seeing this right here? You go right there, you will see it says AKSA targets and resources. Click on that resources. You'll see math, English, social studies, and science. So in that science resources, this is where Kim was at today, pulling some of those resources. Your math resources look like this. It's got them broken down by grade level, and then it's got it broken down by the progression. So if I was looking at each one of these as a progression of what do I need to teach first, second, third, this would be a great place to start. Okay. And that's one of the things I like about the way that we broke it down, because in expressions, it starts in fifth grade. What does it look like? We made it look very similar to the standards. And so I worked on this document with our task group, and our Kentucky State task group for mathematics worked on these, and we wanted them to look very similar to the standards. And so we talked about what is it limited to? Limited to parentheses only for this one. And then, so what do I need for clarification? And that's one of the things that we didn't have many years ago. And let me tell you, this clarification is amazing. So having that clarification there about brackets and braces and those kind of things, but then what are some things that my student needs to get out of it? But look at here, we even included the vocabulary. So the vocabulary is right here. These are all the words that you're going to be using while you're teaching it. And then over here are some prerequisite skills that your student may need. And so we put that in there. And then how is this going to tie into later? And so you'll see how this ties in and how your kids keep progressing toward the mathematics. Now, one of the things that, of course, we did not have was this wonderful part down here of possible areas of difficulties and misconceptions your child may have. And then other considerations that you may want to include. Word problems are always there. I say do not do naked numbers. Naked numbers confuse our kids because they need a way to experience it to something they understand. And then another thing is having an anchor chart for the order of operations. I know a lot of us use PEMDAS. That's one way, but there's other ones out there, and it depends on your student as to what you may want to use. So this is available to you inside that alternate folder. And so I love the fact that these are all the ones for expressions. And so you can go back to the math resources. There are progression videos that are here for you. So there's a lot of good stuff for alternate assessment and how to teach each one of those in a progressive video. And so if you click on these, it'll take you right through. It'll tell you what to do, what to say, when. You just hit the present button and it starts rolling through, and there's somebody talking you through each one of them and what they need to look like. So again, if you don't have some thoughts, maybe some ideas on what should I be teaching or how should I be teaching it, this gives you that opportunity to do that. I don't know if any of you guys had seen this yet, but these are available to you, and it's all on that alternate assessment. It's right in here. It's available to you. Please use this. So that's part of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. So, and that's in your kydose.org, the KASA alternate assessment resources. So today let's dive into multiplication, let's dive into fractions, let's dive into what is patterns and functions more so than others. And so as we're diving into these, let's talk about what are some of the resources that I want to use. So if I'm doing multiplication, and these are the ones for multiplication, these are all your targets there. And it's talking about interpreting and demonstrating products of whole numbers. We're looking at what is the quotient. These are all words that we're going to be using, right? And equal shares, I call it fair share because my kids know how to fair share. It means we all have to have the same amount. Then, of course, in fourth grade, we talk about multiply and divide and solve problems that have, and I always start out with, we still talk about it as groups of something or it's rows of something, right? And because I tie this right into when we get to negative numbers, I need both of those. And then, of course, recognizing those multi-digit numbers in one place representing 10 times as much. And so this is another area that we sometimes get a little worried about, right? I mean, it's something that we don't always think about when we're doing these things. So, areas that I want to talk to you about today is base 10 blocks. So I'm going to change out how I'm sharing with you guys. If you give me just a second, because I'm going to dive into some multiplication using those base 10 blocks, a hundredths chart. We're going to talk about what a decimal chart may look like for you guys. And we're also going to discuss today Amplify. Have any of you guys seen Amplify? And if you have you used Amplify in any way? Amplify is also called Polypad. So with this, I wanted to talk about using a hundredths chart. So before I talked about if my kids it was 3 rows of or 3 groups of, right? And so let's talk about using a hundredths chart real quick. And let's say that it's 3 rows of 6, right? One of the things that I talk about is 3 times 6 is 3 rows of 6. And I start and I'm outside. They go 1, 2, 3. I'm sharing 3 rows of how many is in each one? 6. And they can go through and put X's if they need to get their 6. And then if they need to, they can write 6 right above there. And then they can count on and just keep it going until they're like, oh, this is 12. And then they keep on counting really quickly until they get to 18. And so 3 rows of 6. And so they're able to see that very quickly. We do this with all of them all the way up to 100. This is really important for our students to be able to see this and to be able to do this. So 3 rows of 6, maybe they're going to do it. I'm going to turn my chart upside down real quick so that we can do another one. And maybe it is 5 rows, and this is a good one to start to see, 5 rows of 7. And so if you have a hundredths chart that actually has the 5 divided off to where it's like this right here, and I need to probably put another color down through there so that you guys can see how it's divided off. So if this is actually divided off as groups of 5, and kids can start breaking down because this gets into the distributive property for later. And so I say, okay, we're doing 5 rows. And they start counting, and we're going to do 7. And if you have like a coordinate grid to where it's 5 and 5, and so they can see the 5 and then the 2. And so they will finish these up. They will mark them out. Maybe they're counting as they're marking. And so they know this is 7, this is 14. They keep on going until they get to 35. Some of your kids will get to the point to where they're like, oh, okay. But the one thing that they can see is I can break this 7 down into 5 times 5 and 5 times 2. And so if I know my 5s and I can count by 5s, I know this is 25. And I know that this is 10. And then I just have to put those together. And so we can start breaking it down that way. And that also helps a little bit later when they, like I said, they're doing the distributive property, or even if they're doing division. And so we'll talk more about how that works in just a few minutes. So this is with the hundredths chart and how I use that. And I love the hundredths chart because it gives my kids the opportunity to start seeing those. Of course, counters are your friend. And I want them to use counters as often as possible. But with this one, I use either small plates or small bowls and they drop it in. And that way I don't have to worry about them actually losing the counters or messing those up in ways that they can lay out their bowls, as in 5 bowls. And then each bowl has 7. And we talk about if everybody was at a party and I had 5 people at my party and everybody wanted 7 French fries, or maybe they wanted 7 pieces of the little pizza, right? So, or the pepperoni rolls, maybe. And so they would actually put those pieces in each one. We would have that discussion about how many did 5 of them have in it, how many did 7 of them have in it, or how many did each one have in it. We would do those. Another thing that you could do is use a bead string. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have used a bead string before, but bead strings are definitely one of my favorites because it's so linear and it's easy for our kids to see. And so the bead string looks like this, if you see it on my paper here. So this is our bead string. I want to move some of this out of the way so that you can actually see it. I use clothespins. And so my kids in this one, let's say we're doing 5 groups of 7. And so they pull off their first 7. I tell them to pull it all the way to the end. And they actually put a clip. And so I'm like, okay, is that 7? And they'll check and make sure. So 1 group of 7. And then they're going to do 2 groups of 7. And we'll talk about what does that look like, because this is now 2 groups of 7 is 10 and 4 more, which is 14. And then they'll do 3 groups of 7. 3 groups of 7 is how much? 21. Wow. Okay. And then we'll do 7 more. We'll have that discussion about that. So remember, we're doing 5 groups of 7. How many groups do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's my 5th group of 7. And how many is that? And they can quickly see if they're decent at their 10s. This is 10, 20, 30, and then they just have to count the 5 up at the end. Sorry, my camera's not big enough to actually show you all that, but to see 10, 20, 30, 5. And so they can quickly see that in groups, right? And so that's the bead string that we can do. That's the hundreds chart. Let's talk about base 10 blocks. Now, I like to use the clicking base 10 blocks. If you don't have them, don't worry about it. You do not absolutely have to use them, because that is not something that is there that you have to have, but just some base 10 blocks. And they do not have to be different colors. They can be the same colors so that they can see them very well. And so one of the things that I like with the base 10 blocks that actually connect, pulling them out real quick, is that I can lay them on 100. And so they can start to see these. And so this is the connecting ones. You can see they've got a little bit of a pattern at the top. And so I can very quickly do the same thing here with base 10. I can take my 1s, my 1 units, and I can lay them on top of there. And so I'm going to say, okay, get 7 in our hand. We're going to fill up the first row. So they'll get 1, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's fill up the first row. And they'll fill up their first row. They'll continue to do this until they see how it fills out. And so let's just say in this case, it's 3 groups of 7. And in this case, we're going to go down through here and they're going to actually put on those 3 groups of 7. We would have conversations about what this could be. Maybe we're getting carrot sticks and we know everybody in the classroom needs to have 3 groups of 7 carrot sticks. I don't know who would want to eat 21 carrot sticks, but maybe that's what we need. Maybe we should have had it the other way. It should have been 7 kids in the classroom and each one gets 5 carrot sticks apiece. But in this case, we're going to do 3 groups of 7, which is 3 rows of 7. We fill it in and the kids can easily see and count and see what's missing. That's what I love about it. They can see what's missing And with the connecting blocks, if you have any of these in your building, borrow them. Usually the elementary has them. They don't fall off, right? Once they've connected them, they don't fall off. And so we can really see how these work. These are great for our kids. And so they're the connecting base 10 blocks. That's another good way. Plus, if I'm doing decimals at this point, I can have a discussion. This whole one is 1, right? And this is 35 hundredths of a 1. And so this is another great way for them to be able to see that amount. So if you're doing decimals, this is a really good way to be able to see that. So like I said, the base 10 blocks I love, and they can lay them over them, which is what you want for them. Or you can use the bead string if you're doing multiplication. We can also make sure, like I said, if you have them, use the linking cubes, because you can link the linking cubes up. And in the linking cubes, then at that point, you can actually have them to do the 3 rows of 7, and they can lay them out each one. So that would be another great way to be able to do that. Again, like I said, this is a great way to show decimals too, but I use the hundreds chart and actually break that up. There is a decimal chart that you can get online. And let me show you that decimal chart. So in this case, this is the decimal chart that you will see, and you will have access to this. I put this on different paper. So I had the solid as a white, and then I put it on another color and cut up tens. And then I put it on another color and cut up just the individuals so that they could lay them on top of each other to actually be able to do addition and subtraction with the decimals, which is one of your standards. You'll want to make sure that you can let them just lay them on top of each other. And if you put them on cardstock and you laminate them, then you can have them forever. And it's a great opportunity for you to be able to do that. Again, if you don't have that, if you don't want to do that, you can always choose to do the base 10 blocks. That's another option that you have. So that's another good option for your alternate says Amplify. I'm going to go into it real quick because I love Amplify. And so some people have already used it. It's a wonderful resource. You have all kinds of stuff here. It just launched the PolyPad. Inside the PolyPad, you'll see that you have number tiles, which is our base 10 blocks. This can be your 1, right? And then you can have the kids to actually lay on top of it, each one of those, and it changes the color, which is wonderful, as you can see. And this now is showing 100th, right? So understanding what that means. If it's got a full 10 on it, and they can rotate it, because you can rotate this to go this way, full 90, you can take it, lay it over it, move away from it, it shows 1/10. And what does that 1/10 mean? And this can go right along with, if we bring it back this way, because of the way that the 100 chart works, your 1/10 can go this way, and it follows right along with your 100 chart, which will help. So that's an option that you have with the PolyPad. Also, with this, if I'm doing groups of, and we were talking about it, and maybe I am doing, this one has, you can split it, right? You can split it into multiples. This one, you can do the same thing. You can split it, and you can pick where you want to split it at. So that helps. And then you can merge it back together. So maybe you're wanting to do groups of 5. Oh, these are too big. I need to go back to this one. I'm going to split. I'm having trouble moving these apart. But that's okay. It doesn't really want to split for me. So I'm just going to pull my little ones over. And so if I was laying these on here, and maybe it is 2 groups of 3, my students can do 2 rows of 3. And they can see how many that is. Another thing that you can do is, these are the linking cubes, right? And we can put them together and they will actually snap. I don't know if you heard that, but it does do the snap. And so they can do, if your kids are really into using like the iPad or those kind of things, this is a great place to use that. So this is 2 groups of 3. they had the number bars, which is essentially for us, they did 2 groups of 3. There's 1 group of 3 and it has the number, which is very similar to quaternary rods. They can put these together and then they can say, okay, well, what matches that? Well, let's see if 5 matches it. I can pull down 5. No, 2 groups of 3 is not 5, so that one doesn't work. So maybe 6. Let's try 6. It was really close. So then they can pull down 6. They can stick 6 right underneath of it. Does it match? Yes. So 2 groups of 3 is 6. So this is another opportunity that they have. Number grids. They have the multiplication here. And so our kids can see 2 groups of 3. Where do I fall? 2 groups of 3. I'm at 6. And so they can see that you can switch the directions on this to where it's at the bottom. So I like this one better because they're building up 2 groups of 3 or 2 rows of 3. And where am I at? I'm at 6. So that's another option that they have with this. Now on the number line, which I really, really love, if I've got this number line and I want 2 groups of 3, I can put it here. This is my first group of 3. And now I'm going to have another group of 3. I can just copy this one if I wanted to and lay it starting at the 3. Now I have 2 of these. Where did I get to? 6. And they can see that very easily with the 2 groups of 3. And we can do the jumps on a number line, which I love. I have my kids to fold the number line. How many times are you going to fold it? Well, if it's 4 groups of 8, I'm going to fold it 4 times. And where am I going to fold it at? The 8. And I'm just going to keep on folding it. And where am I getting to? 32. And so I use one of the tape measures that we use for like cloth and fabric. That's a great one to use. If you've ever been to one of my KVEC trainings, I usually give you a KVEC ruler. They're very flexible and easy to fold. And that's the reason I use those, is because we can fold them. Now, if I'm doing division, I do the same thing, except for I'm doing it backward, right? I talk about, I'm going to start with the bead string. So I'm going to move back over to the bead string with our sharing. And let's say that it's 32. I can quickly see 32. I'm going to pull those down. So there's 20, there's 30, here's 2 more. I'm doing this in 4 groups, or I'm going to do this by 8. 32 divided by 8. So here's my first group of 8. Let's do that. Put it on here. My third group of 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. There's another group of 8. Slide it down. 2, 4, 6, 8. Third group of 8. And then my fourth group of 8. So 32 divided by 8 is 4, because I can count right here, and it's 4. It's 4 groups. And so that's another way that I do that. Same thing here is if I have, we're going to use 32. And I'm going to go ahead, put 32 on here. And I tell them that you have to have it within 8. And so in this case, I've already got 7. And so there's 8. Then there it would be 16. And I make them lay out 32. And I make them put them into the groups of 8. Each rows of 8. And then I say, okay, how many groups do I have when you get done? So they look at that and they're putting them together and they're like, okay, I've got 32 here. And I'm putting them on here. And I'm like, okay, how many would I have? And so how many rows do I have when I get to 32? I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And so it's one way for them to be able to easily see this and to be able to do that. So that's 32 divided by 8. And so, like I said, have them to do this as much as possible. We talk about the CSA model, but one of the things that we don't talk about enough is, do we use the concrete for them often enough, and then allow them to draw it, or allow them to use polypad to start to do that. And so you can do that again right here with the number line on the polypad. We can I want to move over and start sharing that because I want you to be able to see that. And so if we're doing this and I'm wanting to get to 32, the cool thing about the number line on the polypad is we can extend it. I know you were probably wondering about that for those of you who have not used it. I'm going to get rid of some of the stuff real quick. You can actually highlight and delete very quickly some things. So in this case, I'm going to 8. And so my first group of 8, and I'm trying to get to 32, right? Starting at 8, I want to do another group of 8. Now remember what I said, you can just copy this. Am I at 32 yet? Nope, I'm at 24. Let's extend my number line. Let's copy this again because I'm not there yet. So I need to copy it. And believe me, your kids will catch on to this copying thing quicker than you think. And there is my next one. And guess what? How many jumps did I make? And so we can have that discussion. We can also find 32. Let's extend this. I found 32 and 8. And where am I at? Showing this on the hundreds chart, I'm at 4. And so they can very quickly find 32 and 8. And we can say, oh, wow, I'm at 4. Now, if I have a large one of these that goes all the way out to 20, and I'll show you something real quick for simplifying fractions since we're here. And I've got this up. So let's say we've got 20. And let's say here is my grid. And you guys can see my grid. Let's say that I have the fraction 24/72. So 24 over 72. So I go through here and I'm like, I need to find 24. Do I see 24 and 72 on the same spots? I do. I really do. I want to see if I can. I want to put a dot on them. If I can, let me find a way to put a dot on here. Thousand cubes. I'll put a dot on there. So here is 24. I could use my pencil at the bottom. I don't know why I didn't think of that. 24. And here is 72. I'm just going to go ahead and bring these over. Now, the cool thing about that is now I need to draw a line, right? I'm going to draw a line because they're on the same line. Now I'm needing to draw a line down. I want to do that again. I need to draw a line from 72 to here. Oh, wow. Guess what? That's 3/9. But I think I can find 3/9 somewhere else. I can. Look, 3/9 is here and here. So let's do here to here. And then let's do, let's do here to here. It's actually 1/3. So my answer is 1/3 when I simplify my fraction. Did you guys know you could use this to simplify a fraction? But I use a multiplication chart to help my students with simplifying fractions. So that's one of the things that's very quickly and easily made for you. But the big thing is I talk about what are we dividing by? Well, if this is 24 and 72, what do I need to divide by? 8. I get to 3/9. And then what do I need to divide by for, again, if it's 3/9? Well, let's do 3. So then if I divide by 3, I am at 1/3. And so that's another great way that you have to be able to do that. Now, what about fraction strips, fraction square, or graph paper when we're working with fractions? Has anybody used those? Because that's the next thing on our list is using graph paper for fraction strips. Just have your kids to fold the paper. That's the most wonderful thing that you can do for your kids. So have them to take pieces of construction paper, and I use different colors, and we do a fraction strip fold. So the first one we write, it's a hole on it. And then the second one we fold in half. And the students fold it in half, and we write 1/2 and 1/2. And then we actually Don't cut it at this point. We wait till later to kind of cut it. But we do draw the line in the center and we write 1/2 and 1/2. Then the next one we fold is a fourth. Well, what is a fourth? It's a half times a half. So we fold it in half and then we fold it again in half. And now we have fourths. And we do this for the eighths and then we do it for the 12ths. And then we move back and we do thirds, which is really hard. But I ask the students, when do they need to fold something into thirds? And someone will say, never. Someone was like, I don't know. But I talk about when we fold a letter that we have to mail, we have to fold it into thirds. And that's a great time to have that discussion about why we do that and how we're going to use those. And then we get into, okay, we did thirds the last time. That's a great way for you to start again. Now let's do 6. Well, what is a third? And what is a third? And then to get to a 6th, I need to fold it in half. So a third and a half is a 6th. And so we can have that discussion too. And they'll fold those. And then after they get done folding all these in the ninths, we'll do that. Sometimes I will put in the fifths. But now the one thing about the fractions is you got to watch the denominators you're going to be using, because you may not be using all those denominators, and it will tell you in your targets if you're going to be using those or not. So that's another option that you have, is to determine if you're going to be using those. So look in your targets to make sure the denominators that you will be using. If you're only using like the benchmarks, then stick with the benchmarks for a while and then move on up. But when I've got all those fraction strips laid out, one of the things that I do is we talk about, okay, which one of these is larger if I was doing this with pizza or maybe with a cake? And so we have that discussion of, if this was a cake, which one of these pieces would I want? Well, the half is much bigger. Well, why is a half bigger? Well, what about 5/10? Or what about 4/8? Isn't that the same amount? And so we'll have those discussions of the pieces out of the cake or how much out of the cake would equal a certain number. And so that's a great way to start having conversations for your kids. And that's fraction strips. The fraction squares, they look like this. And I don't know if anybody has fraction squares, but I hope that you do. If not, probably somewhere in your building is some fraction squares. I don't like using circles because it doesn't allow for the area model for multiplication for later. And if you've used the area model for multiplication, then you want to have fraction strips for your kids. And so one of the things that I like is with my fraction strips, with fraction squares, it truly makes a square and it's truly an area model. And so for my kids, this is truly the whole. This is a half, as you can see, and it will lay perfectly on our whole. These are the same size as most of your hundreds blocks, which is cool. Then, of course, we have thirds, and the thirds are right here. And so when we talk about a half times a third and how much are you actually going to get, so I lay this on here. And if I'm laying this on here, and this is a half times a third, you can see the third in the background. I'm going to pull them apart a little bit so that you can see them. But how do we know that's 1/6? Well, when I lay this on here, a half times a third, the only thing that is covered is what? 1/6. So they can actually see this 1/3 times a half was actually covered 1/6. And that's amazing when they start to see that, because they have to be laying on top of each other. Now, if I said a half, how many groups of a half? This is the division. How many groups of a third is a half? and then you're looking at it, what is that? And it's going to be 2/3, right? And why is that? Because you can get how many in there? That's what you got to look at. How many of these could you get in there? In this case, we can put in 1, 2, 3 sixes into a half, right? But how many thirds is that? How many is 3 sixes and thirds? And so then that's what you've got to talk about. How many is 3 sixes and thirds? And then you can lay these on here, and it's 1 1/2. And that's so cool when they can see that. And I love that because it gives them that option to be able to do that. The other thing is you can use these for when we're adding, they're placing them on the whole, like 1/3 and 1/2. And you're like, well, how many is that? And they can start to build on there. And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, let's try our sixes, or let's try our fives. Fives don't work. So let's try our sixes. Oh my, look how many that is. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sixes. So they can actually see that because the 6 is not able to fit on the half and the third. So options that you have for your kids is the fraction squares. Again, using graph paper, a blank hundreds chart to where they're filling it in and they're using the amounts that they know they need. Those are great ways, but I love the fraction squares for this one. The other one that we have that I really wanted to talk about, because like I said, we want to use that CSA model. We want to use it as often as possible with fractions, as folding, drawings, and overlays. How many of you guys have used overlays before? If you've used overlays are a great way for your kids to be able to see multiplication in the word problems. And so one of the things that I use all the time is with these overlays, and the overlays themselves, I just wanted you to have some good resources. Look like this, and they're clear. You can just see through them, right? Oh, that's not a good one to do. That's one. And then here's one. This is 12/12. But each one of them is a little different. And so you got to look at the bottom of them. The bottom of them will show you and say, oh, that's 1/3. So 1/3 of a half, and you'll see the mixture that happens is 1/6 in the total amount. Let's do a different one. Let's do 2/3 and a third. So let's lay that on there. And where is it? It is 1, 2 out of 9. So 3, 2 ninths. So 1/3 of 2/3 is 2 ninths. And so they can see that. And I love this. And you can do this on graph paper, because one of the things that you can do, or do it on a hundreds chart if you wanted to. I'll pull up another hundreds chart to show you. So if I was doing this on a hundreds chart, I would say, okay, I'm doing 1/3 by 2/3. 1/3 at the top and 2/3 here. So 2/3 this way, I'm going to actually do, okay, this is thirds over 3. 1, 2, I'm coloring this in this way, coloring this in this way. Where's both colors at? Right here. How many? 2 out of, and then we talk about 2 ninths. And so that's another way for them to be able to see it. Let's do one more. Let's say, I'll switch my paper around. Let's say it's 3/4, and it is 1/5. And so if I was doing this, if I was doing my 1/5, how many down? It's going to be 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so how many is out of that for my fifths that I'm doing? 1/5. And then this is 3/4. I'm looking at 3/4. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and how many total? What do I have? And that's 3. Total amount, 20. And so another great way for our kids to be able to do that. Like I said, you can just use 100 start because our numbers stay within 100, and that's the great thing about that. So just another way for us to be able to see some of our great things that we are working with. So that's folding and drawings and overlays. And our next thing that we're going to talk about is patterns and functions, graph paper, wiki sticks, pegboards. All of those are a great, wonderful way to start to show those. Again, Amplify also has some things on there, and you can use any of those. So another thing with proportions we can use is our base 10 blocks, right? You can use base 10 blocks for proportions. You can use counters. You can use Play-Doh. These are all things that we can use, and I would suggest that you really pay attention to proportions with the base, with the 10 frame. Let's just talk about that real quick. What does that look like? And this one is a 7th grade standard. As you guys well know, that 7th grade standard is there. And so we're going to use a 10 frame mat to talk about proportions. And I love that because in with the 10 frame mat, I can use counters, I can use base 10 blocks, and I can use Play-Doh if I actually get down into the tenths, because I can cut the Play-Doh and show the tenths. So let's do this real quick here. So with the 10 frame, let's talk about that 10 frame and what that looks like. So on the 10 frame, if I'm doing this, I want to have my whole 10 frame to where you can see it. And let's say that I'm doing proportions. What do you notice about the 10 frame? I wish everybody could be on here to where you could say what it is. But these are each one 10%. Do you agree with that? Does everybody agree that these are 10%? Because they're going to equal 100. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, right? It's 100%. Each one of these are going to equal that 100%. So if I was looking at proportions and I was trying to solve, and I said I wanted to know if 20 is the total, what would 12 be for my percent? So if 20 is the total of it, what would 12 be for my percent? Now, for most of us, we may have trouble with this because we're not seeing what our kids aren't seeing what we need them to see. So I'm going to say, how many do you need? Total is 20, right? And so let's get out 20 little cubes. And I'm going to fair share them amongst my board. Now they'll have to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're fair sharing them. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And my last one is 20. 20 is on there. And then I'm going to say, okay, how much does it take to get 12? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Now, that means that these we're not worrying about. And that means 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60%. So this is technically 60%. So 12 out of 20, or 12 20ths, is 60% of 100. Now, let's do this again. Let's make it a little bit more difficult this time. Let's say it's 15 out of the 20. Well, we got 12. Here's 14 and 15. Well, there's 2 of them here. What does that mean? I'm dividing this percentage in half. So I would divide it in half, and this would be 5% and 5%. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say, okay, if I take 10 and I divide it in half, how much is on each side? 5%. And so in this case, it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 75%. So when I said 15 out of 20 is 75% of 100. Now, let's say that they're looking for this amount. And let's say that I need to know that. And so let's say it's 25 is my total, and I want to know how much 80% of 25 is. Oh, I just gave you a hard one, didn't I? You're thinking, how in the world are you going to get 25? Well, let's talk about that. I'm going to get 5 more out. And I'm going to fair share again. Now, we talked about 25. I'm going to get a new sheet of paper because they're not drawn on. Now, I need 25 and I need a fair share. So I'm going to go ahead and start fair sharing. Fair sharing in my little places. Fair sharing, everybody gets 1 as I go through here. I'll make sure everybody's able to get 1. And then I get down to these last 5 and I'm like, hold on, I can't put those there. And so then I realize that, hey, I can divide them amongst, this is where I like Play-Doh, because then I can cut them up and make 10 and each person gets half, right? But I can share on the line, which means you get half and I get half, you get half and I get half, you get half and I get half, because I got 5 of them. Now, the question was, I want to know what 80% is. Well, I know that 80% is here. And so this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Okay, 16, 17, 18, 19. These are each a half, which makes a whole, which is 20. So in this case, this would be 20. And so I love the fact when our kids can see that and they're able to do this. Like I said, I make them roll out little Play-Doh rolls and then they put them on there. And then if they have to fair share them and they can't, I'm like, well, how are you going to make 10 out of that? And if they got 5, they can quickly and easily cut them up. You're going to have to make these to a point. Sometimes they've only got 3. And so what am I going to do? And so my kids are like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't cut these up to make it exactly right. And I said, so I guess we're going to have to cut them up into 10 pieces each. And then how much is each one going to be? And they're like 1/10. And they're like, oh, this little Play-Doh ball here, I would cut up into 10 little pieces. It's going to be 1/10. This little Play-Doh ball is going to be cut up into 1/10. And this little Play-Doh ball is going to be cut up into 1/10. And then I can spread them out. And so if they had to spread out these 3 little Play-Doh balls, they would get 3/10 at each place. And then they could just add up the tenths. And so that's another way for them to be able to do this and to be able to do it on a 10 frame for them to see it. That's very important for our students to be able to do. And like I said, I love the Play-Doh balls because then I can truly just cut them up, right? Now, I have been accused a lot of times if you get counters that are, well, if you get the counters that have, that are soft, or the foam, you can cut those up. Don't be afraid to cut them up. I've done it before. They don't cost as much. So I have literally cut those up into 10 pieces if they needed it so that they could see that. So that's another option that you have. So don't be afraid to do that. But I love the Play-Doh for that reason. If your kids don't eat the Play-Doh. Now, some kids, Kim will tell you, will eat Play-Doh. That's another issue that we have. So if they're going to eat the Play-Doh, then you don't want to cut up small objects. You want it to be bigger objects. And in that case, maybe you use 100 frame for each one of them and then they place them out and they're larger for them. So that's always another option for you to do. So like I said, I use counters. I use the base 10 blocks like I did right here. I use place value Play-Doh. I've used larger pieces if we need them. Any of those will work for what you guys are doing with that. So it's a good option. Yeah, make the edible version that's safe, right? That's a good option too, Kim. I like that. I have seen graph paper that's really small, that's got the full 100 on them, and that becomes a whole. And then you can always do the slips if you needed to of that for paper, so that if you needed to, they could quickly see the tenths. It's harder to do thirds That's the only problem that I have with it. It's harder to do thirds. So how do I adapt my math? First, let's use the concrete, and that's what I always go back to. Blocks, counters, fraction tiles, base 10 blocks, anything that they can use. Pegboards. Pegboards are awesome. Using the floor to actually have a grid on is a wonderful way to do graphing, right? Organizers. And guess what? Your 10 chart is your 10 frame is an organizer, right? Our kids don't know how to organize, so you have to teach them to organize. Any kind of flow chart that you may need. Tactile, make sure it's tactile. Our kids need that movement with their hands. They need to have textures that really grasp them. I love anything that's got like a sandpaper grid for some of my kids. Now, some kids don't like those textures, so you got to know who does and who don't, so that you don't upset a child because they don't like the feel of something. That's the other thing. So kind of know your kids ahead of time. And if they don't like the feel of Play-Doh, let's not push Play-Doh, right? Let's find something else that we can use. Songs. There are all kinds of songs for multiplication out there. Use them. I love any of the little songs and activities that you can do, rhymes, verbal things that we have. Anything that gets my kids moving or hopping or jumping on a number line, those large floor mats that you can get with numbers on them, or create your own. Like put little footprints down and start creating your own. That way they have that opportunity. If you create a number line down near the floor that they can just move in front of, that works too. Doesn't have to be on the floor, but if it's near the bottom of the floor and around, that's the one place we usually don't use, right? Is the bottom, near the bottom of our walls. But that's a great place to have a number line to where the kids can walk in front of. And so that's a great place to put a good number line for them to walk if they need to walk. Those kids who want that movement of a day, this is a great place for them to get it. Modify your curriculum by breaking the task down into smaller and smaller chunks. I may only start out with, on my proportion frame, fair sharing. We will fair share, and then we'll start talking about what percentages are in there. And then we'll move on to whatever the next step would be in that for them to get it. Maybe first it's just we're looking at the percents, and then we start looking at how many items are in there that we are wanting to count up. So thinking about that, use the alternate assessment forms that you get, and don't worry about speed. That's the other thing. Focus on the understanding rather than speed. There are some great resources on KY. If you type in Kentucky alternate assessment testing, to where you can get the actual past test, and you look at that format. As Kim said, sometimes we need to look at that format and see what they're asking our kids to do. You guys have given this quite often. And for those of you guys who have, you know the types of questions they're going to ask. You know that they're usually put in some kind of a word form. So make sure that you're using that. Teach the vocabulary. Ensure that you've used a Frayer model of some sort. And here's what I'm going to say. Our kids need examples, but they also need to know what it doesn't look like. That's going to be the thing. And don't teach the Frayer model with, we're going to start with the definition. Start with the characteristics. Then let them give a definition, or let them say, it has to have this. And so that starts your definition that you want them to have. So using that Frayer model, and then take the Frayer model and cut it up, and then have the examples and the non-examples for them to do a matching game. Kim talked about sorting in science. We can sort all day with our wonderful Frayer model, because we can do examples and non-examples that go with it. So that's another one that you can do. Leverage your technology. Adaptive tools, any kind of adaptive tools that you have in your text-to-speech, use that. Interactive whiteboards that you can use those. There's all kinds that are out there, and some districts have purchased different things, so that's a possibility. If they have a communication device, use it. If not, and they have a PEX thing, include your math vocabulary in the PEX system, okay? So that when they're doing the math, it's not just the words that they have every now and then that you use for them for eating or for bathrooms and stuff like that. Include your vocabulary for math, science, reading, whatever it may be, into their PEX system. And then also Chat GPT. I can put examples into Chat GPT of questions and ask them to give me a worked example, and it will break it down for me so that I can truly go in and say, okay, these are the first steps I need to teach. Then tomorrow we're going to teach the second steps. And the next day we're going to teach the third step. And the next day we're going to teach the fourth step. And we're going to work this through until we get all the way through it. And we're going to do several of these every day. And that helps us a whole lot. Plus, if you're wanting to teach it a certain way, and maybe you've got a parent at home who wants to also help, ChatGPT will give you that list, and you can highlight what you're doing so far, send it home with them and say, these are the pieces I'm using right now. And that will give you a good worked examples, and it's got steps to it. It's got like step 1. If it was a 2-step equation, step 1 would say, I'm going to move I'm going to move the numbers to the to one side. And so in that, what do I have to do? And it'll tell you exactly what they have to do. And then step 2 is this. Step 3 is this. And so it's a really good way of getting those worked examples without you having to worry about, hey, how am I going to break this down? Providing scaffolding and repetition, guided practice have to be consistent. I'm going to say that right. Gradual release from what we're doing to what they're doing is a wonderful way. But also remember that these are math tools. And I talk to my kids about the tools that they're using. And they're tools just like a carpenter would use his tools. And so that's another part that we have to think about. Adapt your physical environment. Like I said, put that number line down on your floor. Put your grid on your floor. It's a great way, or on your ceiling. I know we can't use them during testing, but it's a wonderful way for our kids to be able to get up and move around, and also reinforce that learning regularly. Go back and teach fractions at some point. Go back and talk about some things during lunch or during snack time. Talk about fractions because it's a great time. Everybody in the classroom, we have this many kids. All of them are getting this. So we're increasing that multiplication. So what percentage did you get? Or what fraction did you get? We can talk about that of the food or the amount of stuff. Group activities. Use small group activities. And like I said, when we're teaching and we're doing it with a group, it may be 3rd, 4th, and 5th together. It may be 4th, 5th, and 6th together. But we're still doing all of those sections so they can get social in there. Another thing to do is if you've got peer tutors in your building, let them teach some activities because they will learn more from their peers than they will ever learn from us. And so ask them to teach them how to do a couple of things. You'll have to show them, of course, if they're using some of the bead strings and that kind of thing, how to teach it, but they'll have a lot of fun doing those kind of activities. And so please foster up that learning through getting that involved and using those. So that's another one. Again, break those tasks down into little pieces, relate it to real life, incorporate all the interests and stuff that your kids have. I don't care if they're interested in, and I know this sounds bad, but we have kids sometimes who are in 6th and 7th grade who still like, he's a little Paw Patrol guy. That's okay. You can still use his name in some of your word problems. You can use race cars in some of your word problems. If they have a favorite basketball player, use them in their word problems. It will grab their attention and pull them back in and get their interest going. And so that's one of the things that you try to do. Incorporate any of their interests that they may have back into the things that you're doing. Celebrate progress. Small successes are great successes. And I don't care how small it may be. Sometimes for my kids, if they recognize the symbol more than anything else, I'm ecstatic. I'm like, yes, look at there. You remembered that was the multiplication symbol. Yes, you remembered that was division. Or, oh, you remembered that a fraction is also a division. Yes. And so anything like that, or they remember that some things are a decimal. Celebrate those small successes, and no matter how small they are, and celebrate the effort that a child puts into it, because many times it's the effort. They've sat there with you for 5 minutes and they have put effort into trying to figure out something. Celebrate that effort of that 5 minutes that they put into it, because many of us know how hard it is for our kids to sit there for 3 to 5 minutes and try to do something, because it's very hard for our kids. So celebrate those efforts. Thank you so much.